Scientists pulled DNA from a skeleton that had been sitting in the ground for thousands of years, and when the results came back, every expert in the room went quiet, because what they found was not supposed to exist. The DNA did not match any known human population, ancient or modern. It did not match the indigenous people living in the same region today. It did not match any of their neighbors. It did not match any ancient group scientists had ever sequenced before. It was something completely new, something that should not have been there. And this was not a one-time accident. This same thing, this same impossible result, has now been found in multiple places across the world. Scientists are calling these groups ghost populations, people who lived, survived for thousands of years, and then vanished so completely that they left behind no descendants, no history, and no explanation. If that sounds strange to you, keep watching, because right now in 2025 and 2026, new discoveries are coming out so fast that researchers are openly saying our entire understanding of human history needs to be rewritten. Subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon, because we are covering every single one of these stories the moment they break, and you do not want to miss what is coming next. Let us start in Colombia, not with a single skeleton, but with a study that made headlines across the scientific world in 2025. Researchers published findings in the journal Science Advances, one of the most respected scientific publications on the planet, after studying ancient DNA extracted from 21 individuals who lived in the Bogotá Altiplano, the high plains near what is today the Colombian capital. These individuals lived at different points in time, spanning a period from roughly 6,000 years ago all the way up to about 500 years ago, just before Spanish colonizers arrived. Scientists had never sequenced ancient Colombian DNA at this scale before. They thought they knew roughly what they would find, some variation of the genetic ancestry that links back to the first humans who crossed into the Americas from Asia during the last ice age. That is the accepted story. That is what the textbooks say. The oldest individuals in the study, 7 people excavated from a site called Checua, north of Bogotá, at an elevation of roughly 1.86 miles above sea level, shattered that expectation completely. These were hunter-gatherers who lived approximately 6,000 years ago. And when researchers analyzed their DNA, they hit a wall. This group's genetic profile did not line up with any ancient North American populations. It did not line up with any ancient or modern South American populations either. It was a completely distinct genetic lineage, one that had never been documented before. Scientists at the Senckenberg Center for Human Evolution and Paleoenvironment at the University of Tübingen described them as deriving from the earliest population that spread and differentiated across South America very rapidly, but in a direction and manner that left no copies of itself anywhere else. These hunter-gatherers existed, thrived in the highlands for thousands of years, and then around 2,000 years ago, they were gone. Their genes were gone. The populations that came after them, people genetically linked to Central America, replaced them so completely that today there is no detectable trace of these original hunter-gatherers in any living person. Geneticist Andrea Casas Vargas from the National University of Colombia, who co-authored the study, said something that stuck with scientists across the world. She described the total disappearance of this lineage as unusual, especially in South America. Because in most cases, when one group replaces another, some DNA mixes. Some genes survive. Some fragment of the old population lives on inside the new one. That is just how human history works. People fight, people trade, people intermarry. But here, in Colombia, the original lineage left nothing behind. Researcher Kim Louise Kretek was direct. They simply could not find any descendants of these early hunter-gatherers. The genes were not passed on. An entire group of human beings, people who had names, who had children, who knew the land around Bogotá better than anyone alive today, erased from the genetic record as if they had never existed. An independent archaeologist from Florida Atlantic University, André Luis Campelo dos Santos, who had no involvement in the study, was asked to react to the findings. He said 2 words: "This is unexpected." He said that up to that point, no one in the field believed any other lineage would appear in South America that scientists had not already accounted for. The assumption was that the Americas were peopled in a relatively orderly fashion. One migration wave, one source population in Asia, one spread across the continents. This Colombia discovery does not fit that model at all. Now here is what makes this even harder to dismiss. Colombia is not isolated. It is actually one of the most strategically significant locations in the entire story of human migration into the Americas. The Bogotá Altiplano sits at the northern end of South America, right at the transition point between North and South America, right at the corridor that early humans would have walked through as they moved southward into the continent. If any population were going to leave genetic traces that spread across South America, it would be the people who passed through this exact region. But these people left nothing. They passed through history like smoke through a window. You can see the moment where they were. You cannot see where they went. Now let us zoom out, because Colombia is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle that is currently being assembled in labs around the world. Just weeks ago, in July 2026, researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, published a study in the journal Science, the highest tier scientific publication in the world, that changed the conversation about ghost populations entirely. The team, led by graduate student Yulin Zhang and Dr. Priya Morjani, developed a brand new computational tool called TRACE. The name stands for Tracking Archaic Contributions via ARG Estimation, and what it does is almost hard to believe. It can reconstruct ancient genealogical relationships using only the DNA of living people. No ancient bones required, no preserved tissue, no fossils, just the genomes of modern humans walking around today. And from those genomes, TRACE can work backwards in time and find the fingerprints of people who lived and died hundreds of thousands of years ago and left no physical remains behind whatsoever. The Berkeley team ran TRACE on 503 genomes from populations across every inhabited continent on Earth. They confirmed what we already knew, that modern humans carry small amounts of DNA from Neanderthals and Denisovans, the two extinct human relatives whose genomes we have actually sequenced. But then TRACE found something else, two additional signals, two separate ghost lineages that were not Neanderthal, were not Denisovan, were not any known species, were something else entirely. The first ghost lineage appears to have interbred with modern humans in Africa more than 50,000 years ago, before the great migration that took Homo sapiens out of Africa and into Europe and Asia. This means that every single person alive today, African, European, Asian, American, everyone, carries a small portion of DNA from this unknown group. Researchers estimate that each person carries between 0.5 and 1% of their genome from this ghost lineage. That might sound small, but when you consider that humans and chimpanzees share about 98% of their DNA, every fraction of a percent matters enormously. This ghost lineage split from the main human family tree approximately 800,000 years ago, roughly the same era when the Neanderthal and Denisovan lines began to diverge. So this was a fully separate branch of the human family, one that we have never found a fossil for, never found a bone from, never named, but whose DNA is inside every person on the planet right now. Yulin Zhang put it simply. He said that previous research had suggested there might be ghost ancestry in modern humans, but no one had been able to confirm whether this unknown DNA was present only in African populations or whether everyone carried it, and no one had been able to pinpoint when the interbreeding event happened. The TRACE study answered both questions. This ghost ancestry is in all modern humans, and it happened before the migration out of Africa, which is why it ended up in everyone. The second ghost lineage the Berkeley study found is even older. Researchers call it a super archaic ancestor. This lineage descended from a branch that split from the main human family tree approximately 1.8 million years ago. Not thousands of years ago, millions. This group is thought to have interbred with Denisovans in Eurasia, probably more than 200,000 years ago. The Denisovans then later mixed with modern Homo sapiens, and through that chain of interbreeding, a tiny fragment of this super archaic DNA ended up in the genomes of modern people, particularly those with Denisovan ancestry, which is most concentrated in populations from Oceania, including indigenous Australians and Pacific Islanders. Arjun Bidanda, who co-led the Berkeley study, said the super archaic finding is particularly remarkable because it reveals genetic contributions from a human lineage that lived over 1 million years ago, despite the complete absence of any sequenced DNA from that population. There are no bones, no teeth, no skull fragments, just a ghost echoing through the DNA of people alive today. When scientists look at Homo erectus, one of the most famous early human species, which lived across Africa and Asia between roughly 1.9 million and 100,000 years ago, they notice the timing overlaps. Homo erectus was alive during the era when this super archaic lineage would have existed. But researchers are careful not to jump to conclusions. The connection remains unconfirmed. It is possible. It is an active question. But the fact that we are even asking whether there is a million-year-old human ancestor hiding inside our DNA, and have real data to support taking that question seriously, is something that would have seemed like science fiction 20 years ago. One of the most striking things the Berkeley study found about the ghost lineage DNA is where it sits in our genomes. Researchers found ghost ancestry segments spread widely throughout the human genome, even in regions that were previously believed to be completely intolerant of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA. That is significant because scientists had assumed that certain regions of the human genome were so essential to what makes us human that ancient crossbreeding could not survive there. Natural selection would have weeded those foreign segments out, but ghost ancestry survived even there. And many of the ghost ancestry segments cluster around genes linked to immunity, metabolism, and neural function. This means that the DNA these mystery populations contributed may not have been neutral. It may have actually helped our ancestors survive. These ghost people may have given us something we still use today, thousands of generations later, without ever knowing where it came from. Now, let us go back to that image of the cave, because one of the most powerful stories in this entire field involves a teenage girl found at the bottom of an underwater cave in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. Divers mapping the cave system, a flooded network of tunnels known as Hoyo Negro, which is Spanish for black hole, descended into a large underwater chamber and found, more than 100 feet below the surface, the skeleton of a young girl lying among the bones of extinct animals. Saber-toothed tigers, giant tapirs, ancient bears. The animals and the girl had all fallen into this pit thousands of years ago when the cave was dry. Then, at the end of the last ice age, rising sea levels flooded the cave, sealing everything inside and preserving it almost perfectly. Scientists named her Nia, after the water nymphs of ancient mythology. Radiocarbon dating of her tooth enamel placed her death between 12,700 and 12,900 years ago. She was approximately 15 to 16 years old when she died. She is one of the oldest and most complete human skeletons ever found in the Americas, and she sits at the center of one of the longest-running debates in archaeology, a debate that her DNA finally helped settle while opening an entirely new question at the same time. The debate was this: the skulls of the very earliest Americans, the Paleo-Americans as they are called, look physically different from the skulls of modern Native Americans. They had narrower skulls, sharper facial projections, flatter noses, and other features that led some researchers to suggest that maybe these earliest Americans were a completely separate group of people. Maybe the Americas were populated by two completely unrelated waves of migration. Maybe the first people who got there were replaced by a second group that arrived later and became the ancestors of today's indigenous populations. Nia's skull fits that Paleo-American pattern perfectly. Her features do not look like modern Native Americans. They look like the others of her era. But here's where the DNA came in and made everything more complicated in the best possible way. When scientists extracted mitochondrial DNA from one of Nia's teeth, the results showed she was genetically related to modern Native Americans. Her mitochondrial DNA belongs to a haplogroup, a specific inherited genetic signature that links directly to the source population in Beringia, the landmass that connected Asia and North America during the Ice Age. She came from the same line as today's indigenous peoples of the Americas. So the question about two separate groups of people, definitively answered. There was not a separate first wave that was later replaced by an unrelated group. Nia is genetically linked to the people living in the Americas today. But then comes the new question. If the Paleo-Americans were from the same source population as modern Native Americans, why did their skulls look so different? How does the same genetic lineage produce such dramatically different facial structures across thousands of years? The answer likely involves natural selection and adaptation. The populations changed physically as they adapted to different environments, different diets, different climates. But it also raises a deeper point. Physical appearance is not a reliable guide to genetic ancestry. The people we think we're looking at are often not who we think they are. And that lesson about not trusting the surface of things, runs through every single story in this video. Now, there's another layer to all of this that is important to understand. And it has to do with how scientists actually define the phrase that keeps appearing in headlines. Nobody can explain the DNA. Because that phrase can be misunderstood, it does not mean that the DNA is impossible to analyze. Scientists can sequence it, they can date it, they can compare it to thousands of other genomes. What it means is that the DNA does not fit into any slot on the map that scientists have already drawn. It is a genetic signature so ancient, so isolated, or so distinct that there is no existing category for it. The Colombian lineage is sequenced. It is real. Scientists just cannot tell you where it came from or why it vanished without leaving any descendants. The Berkeley ghost lineage is detected with precision. They can quantify what percentage of your genome it makes up. They just cannot tell you the name of the species it belonged to, because we have never found a bone from that species. That gap between the data and the story that data is trying to tell is exactly where the mystery lives. This is what makes ancient DNA science so different from anything that came before it. For most of human history, if you wanted to know where people came from, you looked at their bones, you measured skull dimensions, you looked at the tools they left behind, you made inferences, you built theories, and sometimes those theories lasted for 100 years before someone found something that broke them. Ancient DNA does not work like that. Ancient DNA reaches past the bones and past the tools and past the theories, and it speaks directly. It says, this person shares genetic code with this other person. This population came from over there. This group vanished here. The technology has advanced so dramatically in the last decade that scientists can now extract DNA not just from bones or teeth, but from the environment itself, from from the dust inside ancient caves, from sediment layers and archaeological sites. Ancient human DNA preserved in cave dust, just waiting in the dark for a scientist to come along with the right tool and the right question. Researchers have extracted human DNA from cave walls in Spain and Portugal, from soil and excavations, from material that did not even look like it could contain genetic information. The genetic record of humanity is not only in tombs and burial sites, it is in the very dirt of the places our ancestors walked. And every time scientists open one of these genetic time capsules, the story gets more complex. The popular version of human history goes something like this. Homo sapiens evolved in Africa, spread out across the world, replaced the other hominins they encountered, and became the dominant species. Clean, linear, one story. But what ancient DNA is revealing is something far messier and far more interesting. Modern humans did not just replace the others, they mixed with them. They interbred with Neanderthals in Eurasia. They interbred with Denisovans in Asia and the Pacific. And now, thanks to trace, we know they also interbred with at least 2 other groups that we cannot even name yet. One in Africa before the Great Migration, one so ancient that it predates everything we thought we understood about the human timeline. What this means is that the human family tree, the image we have all seen in textbooks, that neat branching diagram showing one line leading to us, is wrong. It is not a tree. It is a tangled web. It has branches that crossed over each other and merged. It has branches that went dark and disappeared, but not before passing something of themselves into the lines that survived. The Colombian hunter-gatherers disappeared 2,000 years ago without leaving a single living descendant, but somewhere in this web, they had a place, they had a role. They were not a side note, they were part of the story. The fact that we do not know their ending does not erase the fact that they lived. Researchers are now asking a question that would have seemed unanswerable just 10 years ago. How many other ghost populations are still out there, hiding in the DNA of modern humans, waiting to be discovered? Because every time scientists build a new tool, like trace, they find something the old tools missed. The Neanderthal genome was sequenced in 2010. The Denisovan genome followed shortly after. For a moment, scientists felt like they had filled in the major blanks. Now, just 15 years later, 2 more unknown lineages have been found. And those are just the ones the current tools can detect. There may be others, older, fainter, harder to find, that no method built today is sensitive enough to see yet. There is something deeply humbling about all of this. Every generation of scientists believed that they were close to the full picture of human history. Every generation was wrong, not because they were bad scientists, but because the full picture keeps turning out to be larger than anyone expected. The Columbia study, published in Science Advances, was described by its authors as covering the first ancient Colombian genomes ever published. The first. A country at the gateway to South America. One of the most important crossroads in the entire story of human migration across the Americas. And until 2025, not a single ancient genome from that country had been sequenced and published. Think about how many other regions of the world are in the same situation. How many ancient grave sites have never been excavated? How many bones are still sitting in the ground in countries that lack the funding or the facilities to run these analyses? How many ghost populations are still waiting to be found? This is not about doubt or confusion. This is science working exactly as it should, asking hard questions, following the data wherever it leads, even when it leads somewhere unexpected. Even when it means admitting that a story we told for 100 years was incomplete. The Columbia ghost lineage, the Berkeley ghost ancestors hiding in every human genome, the skeleton of Nia at the bottom of a flooded Mexican cave, all of these are pieces of the same larger truth. Human history is far older, far richer, and far more complicated than any single map or theory has ever been able to hold. And here is what I find most powerful about all of this. These ghost populations are gone. They left no descendants, no written record, no monuments. But they are not entirely absent. They are in us. The ghost lineage, found by Berkeley researchers, that unknown group that split from our ancestors 800,000 years ago and interbred with Homo sapiens before the Great Migration, is in your DNA right now. Between 0.5 and 1% of your genome came from people whose name we do not know, whose face we have never seen, whose story we are only now beginning to piece together from fragments. That is not a small thing. That is a connection across almost 1 million years. That is proof that no matter how many times one chapter of human history ended, how many times a population disappeared, was replaced, or was overwritten, something always carried forward. Some part of the story always survived. We are the surviving copy of every population that came before us. Every migration, every encounter, every period of isolation, and every moment of mixing, all of it left a mark that we carry in ourselves, whether we know it or not. God created humans with a complexity and a continuity that goes deeper than any of us has fully grasped. And the scientists finding these ghost populations are not disproving that. They are discovering just how deep that complexity runs. Every new genome that gets sequenced is another page in a book that started being written millions of years ago and is still being written right now. If this video opened your eyes to something new, please share it. Hit that like button. Leave a comment telling me which part surprised you most. The Columbia ghost lineage, the Berkeley study, finding 2 unknown ancestors inside every human genome, or Nia at the bottom of that Mexican cave. Subscribe so you do not miss the next video. These discoveries are coming fast. The scientists are finding things faster than the world is paying attention to them. This channel exists to make sure you do not miss what matters. See you in the next one.